And in terms of the Dogon, would you say that that's, again, then that's more closer to an original and correct interpretation or even scientific explanation for the creation of even the universe and life on this planet? Does it go into depths, so to speak, in terms of where we come from and how we came about to be, for instance, human beings?
Yes, the Dogon priests say that one purpose of their cosmology is to explain how their tribal god created matter. And they start with discussions of a structure that's very similar to an atom. And they say that it's composed of structures that are very similar to electrons, protons, and neutrons. And when I got that far in my studies, and I didn't know very much about astrophysics, but I knew that they had these two definitions right, the definition of the atom and of the components of the atom. And so I asked myself, what are the chances that they also have the remainder of the structure right as you descend down from there? And I began to educate myself with popular texts on astrophysics written by Stephen Hawking and Brian Greene and people like that. And what I found was agreement with the Dogon point by point, both in descriptions and in drawings or scientific diagrams, all the way down to matter in its original wave-like form at the very conceptual bottom of matter.
That's just incredible. And do you think that the Dogon have the higher priests within the society full understanding of the implications, so to speak, of this knowledge, what it actually means? Or do you think that the Dogon have served more as the keepers of this knowledge, and maybe not the everyday person in the Dogon, among the Dogon people understands this kind of the scientific level of the knowledge? Or how would you explain that, Laird?
I would say that the Dogon priests know very clearly that the information they have is correct and important. Now, whether they have the knowledge or the background to be able to correlate that to the science that aligns with it, I don't know. I can't say that they do.
Yeah.
But they know for certain that the structures that they're preserving and the definitions they are preserving are very, very important because they are correct.
Fascinating. How have you gone about researching some of this material? Have you gone down there yourself? Have you spent a lot of time in the library? Have you talked with some of the people themselves?
No, really my main tool for understanding it has been research into the anthropological studies and then comparison to other cultures that have similar traditions. The problem is if I were to go to Dogon country and ask to speak to a Dogon priest, the Dogon priest would see me as an interloper. I would ask a question, and the Dogon priest would say, "Your background doesn't warrant your asking this question," and wouldn't talk to me.
That's too bad.
And so, since your average Dogon tribes person knows nothing or not very much about the inner secrets, I could easily go there. I compare it to a parent visiting a college campus on Parents' Weekend and coming away with the impression that there's no evidence of drug or alcohol use. So the Dogon were actually restudied. They were originally studied in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s by a pair of French anthropologists, Marcel Griol and Germaine Dieterlen, and then later restudied, which in anthropology it's not unusual for some aspect of an anthropologist's work to get restudied, but it's highly unusual to have an anthropologist's entire life work restudied. Well, in the 1980s, a team of anthropologists led by Walter van Beek, who's a Belgian, restudied Griol's Dogon cosmology and concluded that the Dogon priests had simply fabricated a cosmology to satisfy Griol's questions.
Oh, God. That's interesting.
And so now how do you disprove that?
Yeah.
Well, the way you disprove it is, I have a daughter who visited in India for a few weeks. She was working with the Himalayan Health Exchange, and she came back and reported to me that she had seen ritual shrines all over India that reminded her of a shrine the Dogon built called a granary. And so we called up some photographs on the internet and could see that there were outward similarities. And I proposed to her Well, how about if I suggest 5 levels of symbolism, 5 points of symbolism that are true about the Dogon granary, and see if we can show they're also true about the Buddhist stupa, which is what she was telling me about. And sure enough, every point that I predicted proved to be true about the stupa. So I bought a book called The Symbolism of the Stupa, which is written by Adrian Snodgrass, an Australian professor, an authority on Buddhist architecture and symbolism. He's from the University of West Sydney, Australia. And his book laid out a cosmology based on this demonic ritual structure that is point for point identical with what Griol laid out for the Dogon. In other words, Snodgrass's book, which was published 20 years after Griol's death, validates that what Griol reported was a coherent and known cosmological tradition.
Wow, that's really interesting. So again, we're back to this idea of comparing different stories and different mythologies, and that will lead us closer to the answer, as it were. I obviously do want to get into some of the material in terms of the understanding of the cosmos at large, and one of the main things that seems to come up when you search for Dogon and pretty early in the process of just discovering some of their stuff is the connection with Sirius, obviously. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Laird.
Okay, the Sirius connection is hard to explain. You can find many evidences from culture to culture that the teachers of this tradition are associated with Sirius. For example, in Egypt, the word for teacher is pronounced exactly the same way as the word for Sirius. And the root word is transliterates as S-B-A-T, which I take to be the same as the word Shabbat in Judaism, which was originally seen as a day of instruction. So there's lots of reason to associate these teachers with Sirius, but it's not until you get into an understanding of the full picture of what the cosmology is trying to tell us that you realize that Sirius as an astronomic body plays an extremely important role in the whole picture. It's difficult to get to. What the cosmology is trying to do, when you look at it in the broadest view, scientifically, is to define for us one of the key building blocks of matter that we can't see, and correlate it to a matching building block in the macrocosm, in the universe, that by which we can tie the two realms together. In other words, you may be familiar with the phrase "as above, so below."
Yes.
Well, this is the structure. That phrase implies that what happens in the universe is fundamentally the same as what happens at the level of an atom. That the structure that they're trying to define for us and to correlate for us is the structure by which we can prove that to be true.
So we can look at things here on the planet, for instance, in a smaller scale in order to learn what is happening above us, so to speak, right?
No, actually the other way around, that we can take a very good look at the large structures that are above us to help us understand what's going on in the smaller realm that we can't see.
I see. And so, again, I mean, for instance, we have this idea of Sirius A and Sirius B as well. We have a double star up there, so to speak. But even the Dogon seem to have knowledge about this before we discovered that astronomically. Isn't that right?
Yes. Now, the reason that Sirius comes into play is because the Sirius star system is a binary star system. It consists of a bright star like our sun and a second dark star